Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Hi, I'm Jen, and I am not so good at feeding crowds. I like enjoying food with people. I like having people over, but I can stress out about having the right amount of food. The other week, our neighbor stopped by with their child to play with ours, and I felt it on my heart to invite them to dinner. But I had that moment of stress. Do we have enough? All I had was a bag of frozen fried rice and the ingredients to make beef and broccoli for our family of 5. Would we have enough for 2 more settings? The plates were smaller for sure. However, we had plenty and everyone left full. I find that to be the case with a lot of the dinners I can stress out about. Somehow we are filled not just by the food, but by the company. Jesus did know how to feed a crowd, though, as we'll see today. By the way, this is the Bible for Busy People podcast, and we're talking this week about God's provision. Today we're reading in Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 32. It says, "So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place." This is Jesus and his disciples. His disciples are coming back from being sent out to preach the word in other places. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Jesus' first response, even though everybody's back together again and celebrating, but also tired, Jesus' first response was compassion. Also, he fed them spiritually first, meeting their needs to learn more about God and the kingdom. I always pictured Jesus with a sense of humor here, and I can imagine him expressing this with a glint in his eye. Why don't you give them something to eat? This is coming after Jesus had sent out the disciples to preach and had told them not to bring provisions, that it would be provided for them along the way. That takes a lot of faith, believing that God would show up and meet the needs. They came back with joy just before this, and I bet they also came back well fed. It doesn't always depend on the amount of food. Just like with my dinner parties, sometimes you end up more than satisfied, even if there isn't a lot to go around. Maybe that's the miracle too. Also, Jesus gave thanks before the miracle. We've talked about this before, but I think that's really important to note is Jesus gave thanks, and that's when the miracle happened. Also, 5,000 men were fed. Other tellings of the story say that women and children were not included in that number. Out of 5 loaves and 2 fish, there were 12 basketfuls left over. But the story does not end there. In Mark 8, verse 1, it says, "During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, 'I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance.'" This already seems very parallel to what we just read. His disciples answered, "But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?" Funny how they asked that question even though they just saw this miracle happen. "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread except for 1 loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, "It is because we have no bread." Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, "Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" 12, they replied. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" They answered, 7. He said to them, "Do you still not understand?" I wonder if sometimes we can be the same way. We can see the miracles, we can rejoice over them, and then we still end up fretting when the next challenge comes. Experts say gratitude can change your life, even physically, as a regular practice. Maybe we need to apply that spiritually as well, reflecting on what we have to be thankful for, on all the ways that God has shown up for us, so that our faith can be built up in preparation for the next challenge. That doesn't mean God will always give us exactly what we want in a given situation, but God will meet us in our need and provide enough. In her commentary on the miracle of manna that we talked about earlier in the week, Juliana Claessens pointed out that this miracle of the loaves and fish is associated with the manna. This inherently Eucharistic act continues the notion of the absolute sufficient nature of God's provision of food, first evident in the story of the manna, in that the 12 basketfuls of bread left over after feeding the multitude of people symbolizes abundance that overrides all of the fearful anxiety of the world. Similarly, we are called to embody God's provision of food by feeding those near and far who are in need, precisely because we have been fed by God. Reflect on those times today when God showed up for you. How can that apply to a challenge that you're facing currently? How can you be inspired to also provide food for other people? I'll leave you with that, and we'll talk one more time again tomorrow about God's provision.
Thank you for listening to The Bible for Busy People. If you need prayer or want to go deeper in your faith, visit our show notes. Will you take a moment to share with a friend and leave a review? It helps the Bible get into even more people's minds and hearts. Find more podcasts that will recharge you at purposely.com.